Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 9 Sovereignty with topic Development of the Concept of Sovereignty. Sovereignty as the supreme power of the state is a modern concept. It came into existence with the rise of the nation state in Europe when the powerful monarchies asserted their authority. But as such, the idea of sovereignty is very old and can be traced to the ancient Greek city states. Aristotle, the father of the political science, defined it as the supreme power of the state. But Aristotle did not discuss the nature of sovereignty. He concentrated on the location of sovereignty. Here, Aristotle had two views. According to him, the deliberative organ of the state should be sovereign, and secondly, he held that the law should be sovereign. He preferred sovereignty to be vested in law. The Romans considered sovereignty as the fullness of power of the state. It was generally accepted that the state should be the final authority in solving the disputes among its citizens, and the law of the state was binding upon them. Romans are also credited with the idea of uniformity of law, centralized administration, and common citizenship. But in the medieval ages, feudalism prevailed where there was no unified authority, and it seemed that all the achievements of the Roman Empire had gone to waste. In the feudal state, the king's authority was highly restricted. It was limited by the church, which claimed immunity in both civil and criminal cases. In fact, the church was organized group during the medieval times, and the head of the church, the pope, claimed superiority over the king. Besides, the feudal overlords and the local communities or commons in the town also challenged the authority of the king. Thus, the king was not sovereign. His competitors came to be known as estates, and feudalism was a state of these estates. Barker calls it as a paradise of estates rather than a pattern of a state where the authority of the state was sidelined. Thus, there could not be the modern concept of sovereignty. Further, the law of God was supposed to be superior to human laws, which also restricted the development of sovereignty as an absolute and indivisible concept. Jean Bodin is the first political philosopher who propounded the modern concept of sovereignty. He defined sovereignty as the supreme power over citizens unrestrained by law. He also defined citizenship as subjection to a sovereign. To Bodin, the power of sovereignty cannot be delegated. Sovereignty is also perpetual and unlimited. Sovereign is the source of law and has the unconditional right to make, interpret, and execute law. Bodin also discussed the location of sovereignty, which he argued depending upon the form of government. Thus, it is located in the king in a monarchy, while in a democracy it resides in popular bodies. but customary and constitutional law and the institution of private property limited Bodin's sovereign. Hobbes further developed on Bodin and attempted to make the theory of sovereignty perfect. To Hobbes, sovereignty is the creation of a social contract, and the sovereign is that individual or assembly which is authorized to will or for general purpose of a peaceful life. Hobbes gave vast powers to his sovereign. His command is law, and all laws are subject to his interpretation. His authority is absolute and unlimited, and the individual cannot disobey him. Sovereignty is inalienable and indivisible. Hobbes pointed out that limited sovereignty is a contradiction in terms, but Hobbes very clearly put one limitation on sovereignty. The sovereignty cannot command any individual to kill, wound, or maim himself. He also made it clear that the sovereignty is also limited by the purpose for which it was created. Hobbes also considered the right to resist the sovereign in case the life of an individual is endangered. In fact, this theory of unlimited sovereignty is a necessary complement to his individualism. Another social contractualist, Rousseau, located sovereignty in the people expressed as general will. To Rousseau, general will and sovereignty are interchangeable concepts. Sovereignty is unlimited, supreme, and absolute. It is also inalienable and indivisible. But unlike Hobbes, Rousseau's sovereignty is based upon the consent of the people. It is a free acceptance by every individual of the exercise of force by the whole group of which every individual is a part. Therefore, nobody can refuse to render obedience to the sovereign, and anyone who does not does so may be constrained by the whole body of the citizens. This means that the individual may be forced to be free. Unlike Hobbes, who gave all powers of sovereignty to a monarch, Rousseau vested the power not in one individual but in the community. But both of them are one, so far as the characteristics of the sovereignty are concerned. Both of them laid down the foundations of a totalitarianism state. In between the two, John Locke stood for a limited government. Locke justified the result of the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which divided the monarchy of its absolute power in England and advocated the doctrine of popular sovereignty, supremacy of parliament, constitutional government, limited monarchy, and the rule of law. Unlike Hobbes and Rousseau, Locke stood for a limited sovereignty. His government was a government based on the division of power and subjected to many limitations. He did not accept the view that the sovereign power was indivisible. He felt that different organs of the government should exercise this legislative, executive, and federative powers of the state independently of one another. His state is sovereign to the society and governance cannot be done arbitrarily. But Locke is not consistent in his views on sovereignty. At times, he suggests that sovereignty is located in people, and at times it is legislature that is supreme. He also seems to suggest that when there is a fusion of legislative and executive powers in one person, he may be called the sovereign. The weakness in Locke's argument is that he recognized the force of political sovereignty but failed to fully comprehend legal sovereignty. The French Revolution is another milestone in the development of the modern concept of sovereignty. The French Revolution stood for absolute and unlimited sovereignty on the ground that people being sovereign, there is no need to restrict the supreme power. The newly emerged nation states also claimed total sovereignty both internally as well as externally. They also asserted their right to expand at the expense of others. The Industrial Revolution expanded the activities of the state enormously, and the importance of the state as a lawmaker was asserted. These developments led to the concept of absolute sovereignty. In England, the parliament became supreme and its supremacy was unlimited. These ideas were reflected in Hegel, who stood for constitutional monarchy, but his king had the power to veto over legislation. According to Hegel, the state is a perfected rationality, the eternal and necessary essence of spirit, the rational in itself and for itself, an absolute fixed end in itself. Hegel combined mysticism with his state. To him, the state is the march of God on earth. He completely subordinated the individual to the state. The state has the highest right over the individual, and his freedom is the gift of the state. The state not only allows but also enlarges the freedom of the individual. But the state acts through laws that must be rational. They must be applied equally. A constitutional government provides order and security in society. The exercise of authority is according to rules that limit the discretionary powers of officials. But the state is internally and externally supreme. Hegel also glorified war, and his state had the right to wage war because the state of war reflects the omnipotence of the state, and the victorious state can claim to be the agent of world spirit. Thus, Hegel's sovereignty is absolute and beyond any control. Morality and international law also do not constitute any limitation on sovereignty. Hegel was followed by Austin, who nevertheless freed the state and sovereignty from all the mysticism projected by Hegel. He advocated a legal view of sovereignty in which sovereignty was absolute, unlimited, inalienable, and indivisible. The pluralistic later on challenged Austin's views. We will discuss both the legal and pluralistic perspective in detail But first, let us understand the meaning of the sovereignty. In our next lecture, the topic will be kinds of sovereignty. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.